I know, but we did.
Okay, we are live.
All right.
Okay, we got a rowdy button. Okay, it's Monday, September 18th, 2023. This is a Curriculum and Learning Committee meeting at the School District of Menominee Falls Board of Education. There is a possibility that a quorum of the full membership of the Board of Education may be in attendance at board committee meetings, including virtual meetings. There will be no full board action taken at any board committee meeting. Only members of the committee may vote on any item on the agenda. A live broadcast will be streamed on the school district YouTube page. To watch the recorded meeting, please visit the SDMF YouTube site. We're at the School District of Menominee Falls, conference room 334 and 3345 on Pilgrim Road. For our 6 p.m. meeting. So we'll call this meeting to order at 6:02. Did I do that in the wrong order? I swear I'll never get it right. Was the meeting properly posted?
Yes.
Okay, and we're moving into approval of meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay, good. All opposed? Okay. Now, we're moving into discussion items, alternative curriculum
Yes.
with Dr. Laura Schiefer.
Yes, I'm excited that Dr. Schiefer is here tonight. We've had several conversations around curriculum, and as like me, Dr. Schiefer is still relatively new, and so as we look at things and see what's working and what needs to be adjusted, one of the things that she mentioned was alternative curriculum. And while that doesn't need to be board approved, whenever we're making significant shifts, I will always encourage people to come and share. So here we are.
Yeah,
So this is new?
it is a new, I think it's a new perspective, and it's also a new approach to building IEPs and serving students. So if you go to the first slide, why are we doing this? What's the why behind it? So we've got our obligation to serve students with disabilities is to use a continuum of services. And what that means is that a student can be all the way in a gen ed classroom, participating with the gen ed curriculum with modifications, what you typically will hear is inclusion, all the way to a full pullout with a totally different curriculum, and anything in between. So that's what I mean by continuum of services. We've got to meet the students' needs along this continuum. What I was finding was that we were doing a lot of co-teaching and using the gen ed curriculum, but not necessarily addressing the needs of students who are significantly lower functioning, who meet the criteria for alternative curriculum, and I'll show you what that is in a minute. Another thing that we do, why are we doing this? Least restrictive environment is one of the legal cornerstones of all special education plans. And we need to make sure that we're addressing least restrictive environment. And least restrictive environment is it can be kind of confusing, because when you hear that term, you might think they're getting less, or it's inclusion. Well, what it really means is that student gets what they need at that time. And that can be different from year to year, from plan to plan. So one way to describe what least restrictive is it's an intersection between what is taught and where it's taught. So is it the gen ed curriculum? Is it the alternative curriculum? Is it in a special ed classroom and a general ed classroom? And for some students, which is a very small percentage, even if you modify a curriculum, it's not going to be appropriate. So you could be in a biology class and we could modify it so much so that it doesn't even look like the class anymore. And so then that would say that student is probably not appropriate for that curriculum. So what is least restrictive and who determines it? So every time an IEP team gets together to develop a plan for a student, they make that determination every time they meet. We use DPI guidance to drive our decisions. The DPI will say that typically 1% or less of our students should be in an alternative curriculum, but there could be exceptions to that. So for instance, I know that they're trying to make sure that we have some guardrails on our decisions and that we're making, good decisions about who participates in what curriculum. But we might have a lot of kids move in that have already, a team has already determined that they have alternative curriculum. We might have just a really high percentage in one year. And so for me, that's okay. I have always told teams, use the process to make your decisions, and I'll worry about the justification. If it's 1.2 or 1.5 or whatever, I can make sure that, justifying that we are using the correct process to make decisions, and then we should be okay.
Does the district get penalized, how some?
Not really.
Okay.
If it's really high, they may come and start doing a little bit of digging. But from time to time, I've had to provide some justifications. And if I can say, here's our process, and we've got a really tight process, they usually take that and they're satisfied with it.
They monitor that on an annual basis and will send us the form for the documentation. Okay.
Because my fear is obviously if there's that repercussions there, then as a district, we're hesitant.
Yeah,
and then
correct.
what in the end is
Yeah.
the students suffer.
Correct.
Because we're not.
Yeah.
So there's been no penalty that I've experienced.
No.
You have to just provide the rationale.
And on the other hand, what some of the teachers were saying to me was they were afraid of being penalized and saying, I don't wanna go over the 1%. And so they were making decisions about students' curriculum without using the DPI guidance. And so all they needed to hear was, don't worry about that, just use the process and we'll worry about the rest later. If the process is followed, I can justify anything. So it was kind of working in our disadvantage. And I can tell you the next slide is,
Can I
go
ask one
ahead.
question? Because it gives, and part of my ignorance, if it is, inclusion in the classroom and then you have pull-out students. Is there something in between where they're pulled out, they can't handle it, a full load that
Yep.
day, or?
Yeah.
Okay, there is.
So when you think about a class and you think about, let's boil down a student's day into just a classroom, a subject. And say the team determines reading is a disability related need. They've got some specific skills within that reading that need specialized instruction.
Mhm.
They may be in, if a class is 45 minutes, they might be in class with their gen ed peers, learning gen ed curriculum for 30 minutes out of that 45. They might get a co-teacher that comes in for 15 minutes, they might be pulled out for 15 minutes. Or it could be 20, it could be 30. Teams make those determinations on a case-by-case basis. So that's what we're talking about when I say continuum of services, is that it could be any one of those options in order to serve that need for that student. It's a good question.
Or they might be getting therapy or pulled for that too.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep. So who qualifies for this alternative curriculum? There is actually a form within our OASIS and what that DPI provides to us. And these are the things that teams have to look at. One, what extent can they participate in general curriculum or in the state standards? That's their first question. So the guiding question is, a student who is typically functioning at least 2.5 to 3 standard deviations below the mean in adaptive and cognitive functioning. So that's pretty
Can you
significant.
expand on what you mean by adaptive behavior?
Adaptive behavior are things outside of your academic behavior, so your self-care, your self-management, your organizational skills, your executive functioning. So things that are, you're trying to put those pieces together of learning and showing what you're learning, and that's adaptive. So everything kind of outside of your
There's a guideline for that? 'Cause I
academic.
don't know how you can, okay.
Yeah, so we've got adaptive scales, so we've got
Okay.
rating scales
Okay.
that will actually give you a standard deviation for where a student is functioning. And that is one of the pieces that is critical to this decision. And for students who we would consider students with an intellectual disability, we've got to have that score. So it's not just subjective. The student also performs substantially below grade level in the content areas, even with accommodations and modifications. So I might give less questions, I might give them the book maybe orally versus them reading it. those accommodations would not be enough for these students to grasp the content.
So for this 1% that we're talking about right now for the alternative curriculum, is it fair to say that most of them would have like someone assigned to them kind of like throughout the whole day?
Sometimes, they might be students who typically, I wouldn't say they're with a one-on-one, but they're probably in small groups where somebody has to be able to accommodate them and make necessary modifications so that they have access to things. Even, just helping them get to they can get to the lunchroom, but maybe once they get there, if there's a problem, sometimes the problem solving isn't there. So, somebody might need to be close to say, okay, what do you do in this situation, and coach them through it.
Okay.
So it's not always necessarily a one-on-one, but they've got, some challenges beyond just the academics. And then finally, they require extensive direct individualized instruction and substantial supports in order to meet goals across lots of areas. So though a team has to sit down and say, is this true or not true for this student? And if it's not true, then they don't participate in an alternative curriculum. So why is it important? So when we have students that are 3 standard deviations below the mean, a regular gen ed classroom is not gonna be meaningful for them. That's not gonna mean anything to them, they're not gonna engage, they're not gonna progress. When we made the shift, some of the feedback that I got at the middle school was some of the kids were just being really stinkers. They were behavior problems. When we gave them meaningful curriculum, they were on point. They were successful, they were feeling good about themselves. So we wanna make sure that we're giving them access to engage and progress. One of the other things that happens is this will really drive the decision on what state test. We started talking earlier tonight, when are the state test results in? Students who are in an alternative curriculum take an alternative state assessment, and it's called the Dynamic Learning Map, or the DLM. So prior to this, if we did not have a student in an alternative curriculum, they were taking the forward. It probably meant nothing to them. It's like reading something foreign and
Sure.
just picking so it really was not meaningful for them. So when we're actually assessing them using the DLM, we're gonna get more information that's useful for that child to build better IEP goals, to see where they really are functioning, to see how they learn something from one year to the next.
So can you give me an example of like what a question of the dynamic learning, like what
The it's an interesting test, and maybe Amy knows,
I know a little bit about it, but.
So you've gotta do like the student, so if Laura was my student taking the DLM, I would sit with her and I would do kind of a prerequisite activity on the computer. That gives them a baseline to kind of where she's at, and then they might ask questions. It might be basic addition, and you have the ability to use manipulatives to figure out that answer. I don't know if you have other examples.
Yeah, no, I do know that it's very individualized, so there's work that the teacher does ahead of time to make sure the test is at the right level and asking the right kinds of questions. So, and then teachers do probably more training than to administer that test than they do for like the forward exam. I mean, when they get training, but it's more
What I will say, just to piggyback on that for the DLM, is that it's a common tool used throughout the state. So
But
it's not unique to.
Yeah, no, it is the
But it's very
identified state
individual.
assessment.
I
And
only
it's
am
used
gonna
in
give
other
it to
states as
Laura
well.
at one
Okay.
time, I'm not gonna give it in a group, I'm gonna give it just to Laura, and then after her, and it'll max out, and then when she's done, then I'm gonna go on to my next student. So it is very time consuming, but again, if we do it right, it gives us really good information. And the dynamic learning map is just a whole, it's got a lot of resources as well. So for teachers to say, okay, what do I do with this information? I've got this is what came out of it. Here's now resources and tools that I can use to teach a student to fill in some of those gaps. So it really, it's a nice replacement. Again, it's almost heartbreaking to think of a student taking a forward exam who is reading at a first grade level. That's really tough. So
That would be given with a special ed teacher.
Yep, so that is an important piece of why am I doing this.
Oftentimes students take it with their case manager, but not always. I've seen situations where we might have one special ed teacher who's done the training,
Yeah.
and so they might do the test for several students.
Sure.
We always want them to test with someone they know.
As familiar as possible.
Yeah.
To get the best results, right?
Right.
And then,
Right.
and and again, the last thing is, why is this important? Well, we're actually measuring the skills that they're learning versus information that they can't access. Like, none of it might mean anything to them. So it really does become a better tool for us to learn about that student. So one of the things that I did this year was I created a policy and procedure manual, and within this, it gives the teachers everything kind of like nuts and bolts behind the process and procedures of what we do. One of the sections that I have in there, if you keep going down, Amy, one of the sections I have is on, keep
So we want
going.
to stop?
Yeah, I know,
I know.
keep going.
So you created all of this also too with a little
Maybe stop right
hyperlinks
there.
to it also
Yeah.
too?
Wow.
Yeah,
So
so
it's like
this
a-
was one of the things when I interviewed, I said, I would love to create a one-stop shop for a handbook for teachers, because oftentimes they'll go home at night and work at night and they're like, I forgot how to do this.
Oh, yeah.
You have to do Control F and then everything pops up with that word in it. I got a lot of really good feedback on this. It was a lot of work, but it's really, I think it's really useful.
And we've never had this in the district before, so how do they manage going about?
I think actually we talked about it during closed session one day
I mean,
too.
like how do we?
We had them in different places. So we had the intranet, right?
Yeah.
And so the
And just
intranet,
Have one cohesive place.
right. They had different buckets of information. They worked really
Sure.
hard on the intranet. The intranet is, sometimes it works better than other times.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to have like one place, and sometimes it was on the G Drive, sometimes it was on the intranet. But here we have every process and procedure, and we'll add to it. I didn't wanna put too much in there. But this section right here will tell, here's the essential elements for parents. Here's how to explain. So what happens is when we do an alternative curriculum, the students are we are now teaching them what's called the essential elements. It's not the state standards anymore. It's called essential elements, or EE for short. So I have a pamphlet in here explaining to parents what are the essential elements. And then on the bottom, one of the things that I did was I did a crosswalk. So what we say is, if a student is in 5th grade and they are taking an ELA alternative curriculum, this is, great. Let's see, maybe if can I walk in or can I?
Let me see if it'll, I don't know why it's asking me to log in.
And then we false.
So is this available just for staff or also to parents too? Like, is
Just
this
to
something-
staff.
Okay, got it. Cause you were mentioning something about parents, so.
But they could
So I
be used
created
to
a
guide.
resource for
Oh, okay,
parents
you
too.
did. Okay, wow.
But not quite as
Parents would have,
extensive.
so where would that, would on our website?
It's on a, it's,
Parents
we
have
send it to parents, there we go. We send, and I can tell you all about, we did create a resource for parents this summer.
Okay.
The parents were liaisons and I did it, and we're handing that out to all families, so it's in that folder. But this is an example of a crosswalk, so this is 5th grade. If a student is in 5th grade and they have an alternative curriculum for ELA, this is a little older, but it's a great resource and it's a really good visual for teachers and families to understand the connection between essential elements and state standards. So the common core standard at that point was quote accurately from a text when explaining what the text says explicitly and when drawing inferences from the text. Student that it qualifies for alternative curriculum would not mean anything to them. So the essential element is identify words in the text to answer a question about information. So that's a little more like explicit, you know, this is very concrete for a teacher, here's what I can do, here's how it relates to that state standard. And then within that standard, there's 4 levels. So a student could start at level 1 where they're attempting to do it with support. And that might be a goal for them if they're not anywhere near that. Or if they're at 1, our goal might be for them to be at level 4 where they are demonstrating the contents, knowledge, and skills at a higher level. And they select words from the text to support an inference. So gives teachers a really good idea that we are still trying to teach kids at a high level and keep them accountable to learning, you know, versus, okay, they don't know what a quarter's worth and we're gonna work on what a quarter's worth for 5 years. We can still look at some higher level skills, but bring it down to a level that means something to them. And that they can then, you know, progress. So once they've got this, then they can start doing some other skills. So that's within our policy and procedure manual. So I've got that for every grade level for math and reading. So teachers are, you know, understanding that some of their IEP goals can really be connected to what other kids are doing in classrooms.
That's good.
So some of the curriculum that we've purchased so far one is called Unique. And what that is a math and ELA curriculum. I think I've got, right there. We've got, so it has reading material at their level, it's news to you. Students are able to engage with their learning because it is, you know, computer generated, it could read to them. Teachers they have activities that they can connect with those essential elements that I showed you. So it's all standards based. So it really connects well to what we are expecting all kids to learn, just at a level that they can access. And then we also purchased ARIS this year, which is a curriculum for, I think that might be it, a curriculum for students with autism. And it's a comprehensive curriculum that looks at social, emotional, physical, communication. Again, everything is connected to standards. So we're not asking students to learn things that we wouldn't expect other kids to learn. We're just giving it to them at their level and at their pace. And teachers are really excited about having these tools. And then at the high school, we're using a combination of what did I have up there, Amy? Attainment, yes, attainment.
Utopia.
And I'm like, yep, Retopia and attainment. So the attainment, we did that deliberately, the attainment going from middle school to high school, so that we're getting really good baseline information for middle school and carrying that through to the high school. We can show growth or lack of growth and then understand why there isn't. And then there's that consistency for students, and then as well as staff can collaborate with each other across the buildings to help themselves become better, well versed in new curriculum.
So all of that is new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they're really, the teachers are
What did we do for
doing,
those students in the past?
they were in the classroom. Oftentimes, they were just in general
They just took a
classroom.
board test, is that what they saw was going on?
We still had many who qualified who took a DLM.
Well, we made a lot of changes though. There was
Sounds like
there weren't that many. We made a lot of changes at the end of the year. So we implemented this, I think, pretty early on. But if you look at the year before, I'd be curious to see how many kids are in the DLM.
I don't remember off the top of my head, but there were still students taking DLM, they just
Sure.
weren't getting corresponding instruction from what it sounds like on the day-to-day.
Sure. Or they were just less measurable, less
Right.
consistent.
Yeah,
So I think
yeah.
that's the
It's a
big
combination of things. Like, I don't know what exactly was done. It's a
Sure.
combination of some kids
Streamlining
weren't in the
things will
DLM.
make it easier. easier, yeah.
Some were, but they didn't get the alternative curriculum. But the teachers really jumped on board fast last year and did a lot of revisions to IEPs. So they, especially the middle school, Terry was very interested and proactive about like, let's get these kids in the right curriculum.
Sure.
And so she was a really kind of a trailblazer with like, let's go. And so we had to actually do a lot of work with evaluations in order to do some of these. Because one of the things we need is, we've got to know that there are 2 to 3 standard deviations below, and so we need IQ tests. Some of them hadn't had any for a while, so the teams worked really hard at getting the information. So it just was a combination of things, but oftentimes the kids were in the gen ed classroom too, just kind of there. And then and my goal is really twofold. One is to be compliant, because if I talk about having a continuum of services that's in the law, right? We truly then need to make decisions based on individual needs, and the laws are there to guide us, and if we choose not to use those, we are not compliant. So I wanna be compliant. And then 2, I think it's just better outcomes for all kids. If we're placing them in the right program, and I think it's better outcomes for teachers too, because
I was gonna say, it sounds like it would be easier for teachers then too, like here's your resource, and this is how you access that. Yes, instead of everyone trying to like create their own wheel,
Yeah.
they can go to everything that has been outlined.
And we're still working on getting resources. We don't wanna get too much. I focused on reading this year, not reading and math. If a teacher said, I really want math, then I would explore with them, and so I'm not gonna say, no, you can't have it. I didn't wanna put that pressure on a teacher to do both in the first year. So we started with reading, and then we'll go to math next year.
And this might sound like I don't know, interesting question, but I was looking at just kind of the amount of special education teachers that we have at Shady Lane, just for an example, and there's, between like the educators and then assistants, there was 14,
Staff members.
at Shady Lane alone. Is that a normal number? Like we see that at Ben Franklin as well? That just seemed really high to me. Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. And I know, I feel like
I know those numbers.
I kind of failed because I'm like finally meeting with him 5 months late.
Yeah.
But
Is it
So-
normal? I would say there's
It's
nothing
just-
ever normal about special ed, right?
seems
Right.
high to me, but again,
We
this
know
is
there's one
my
that floats,
first
right? Like, or
So,
maybe not.
like
We
Maybe
really
that changed.
do
year
look at the
looking at these
numbers.
numbers,
We
yeah.
look at numbers as one measure, and then we look at the weight of the student as another. So a student could be very low, minimal service, but you could have another student that has extreme needs, right? And so like their weight is higher and bigger. When we shift, because of the way the schools are, K2, 3-5, when those kids move from one building to another, that's a big shift, and we've had to move a lot of staff this year.
They
to respond.
right?
They
Depending on the weight
They
of
stay
the
in their
need.
buildings, but we may need to move move teachers. So this year there were teachers that moved from Shady Lane to Valley View. Thank you, Laura, yes. Because there was such a big shift that moved. And
Right.
so we have to respond, instead of just saying, okay, you're gonna you have to stay at Shady Lane. No, you have to move with the kids if that's needed.
Okay.
So I would say that it's not a large number of staff. A lot of the staff is not full-time, even like the educational assistants aren't full-time. So they kind of piecemeal the support across the day for kids. So maybe 2 people are actually like 1 and a quarter, like full-time.
Sure.
And it really just depends on the needs of the kids. And we really are cognizant of like not over serving or over asking, but then asking when they truly do need something, so that,
Making sure that the
Yep.
teachers have the support that they need.
Yep.
at this
so they've been really good about it. And so we did an analysis on numbers at the end of last year. We made some tweaks at the beginning of the year when we had some move-in students.
Okay.
But I would say it's not a large number of staff compared to the need that's there
Okay.
right now.
And do you see the need, is this typical year? Do you see the need trending one way or the other, or every year is kind of like resurvey, move things around?
Yeah, since COVID, students have been lower. You know, there's been some gaps in like communication, problem solving, social emotional, like they come not really necessarily ready to learn. And I don't know if I can't say it's COVID or not COVID, but we know that was kind of like,
time.
yes, like that was kind of a time and place where we could say, okay, how were things before, how were things after? You know, we keep saying kids are getting more severe, kids, you know, we have no way to predict.
Sure.
We have a lot of students that move into our district because they feel like our services are really good. And so we've got, you know, we're a place where people wanna be. And so it just, you know, it varies from year to year. But I just wanna make sure that we're always using our guidelines to make decisions about who qualifies and who doesn't.
Right,
And Amy and I are working on that, you know, together on those that don't, you know, what then, how do we support them, because they still need to be supported and learn.
Sure.
So so I think we're doing a good job of making decisions on who should qualify and who doesn't.
So when you're going on the alternative curriculum and deciding for a student, when does this evaluation occur? Like when do you make that decision? Is it in the summer? Is it during the year, or just throughout the entire year that you make that decision to make that change?
Yep, so their annual IEP, so a student has to have an IEP every year. It could be sooner, they could do a review revise, which is what we did to kind of clean up some of the ones that should have been in an alternative curriculum but weren't. And so we, you know, typically you would know early on that that student is probably heading toward that direction.
Okay.
We would give interventions, we'd give specialized instruction, we'd keep our data. We don't wanna put them in too early because they all should have that right to have exposure and like learn, and all of those skills early on are all things that all kids are learning, right? Kids are learning their numbers and their shapes and their how to make sounds. So we cannot predict something in first grade or kindergarten to say you're gonna be in an alternative curriculum, because all the kids are learning that right now. So as they're, you know, as that gap is getting bigger and kids are learning, you know, to read and then reading to learn, and we're seeing that they're not accessing, then that's when teams start getting together to say, you know, we need to probably look at this question.
Is there separate funding for students that are in the alternative curriculum? Because I would think that this takes more time. So we would be able to, you know, like that would stretch our staff.
Yeah,
right?
Nope, it comes from like the Fund 27, all of it would come from there.
So out of those listening sessions last year, one thing that I remember is kind of what you were saying, like some of the parents were saying that they felt when this child was in the classroom, some of the assignments they would maybe get would be a little over their head. And so was this kind of like the result of some of that with the listening sessions? I mean, I know it's very specific to the child, but.
Some of it, there's a couple things, like, so when you talk about that continuum, some of it I have heard a family like say to me, you know, my son sits in the classroom and they understand nothing. It is like Charlie Brown talking, you know, but some of it is just a matter of teachers having greater capacity and learning how to modify work,
Right.
you know, how to differentiate.
Here's
So,
what I found.
so if it's a little above their head,
Uh-huh.
that's very different than these students here. This is
Sure.
completely like,
So is there more maybe down the road, like training for teachers? Like as a therapist, I always work with where their strengths end and their weaknesses begin.
Yep.
You know, that's my sweet spot.
Yep.
And so I have to hone in on that. And as a teacher, I can't even imagine all the different levels, and you have that many kids in the classroom. And
I was at the high school this morning and we were talking about this very thing and trying to articulate and pinpoint where do we start? Because you've got teachers, you know, it is very typical that as the child gets older, it gets harder to differentiate. You know, you've got a kid that's sitting in a biology class, but they've got a second grade or third grade reading level,
Sure,
which they might not qualify for this alternative curriculum.
cause they
How
kind
does
of
it-
skate through just that whole time.
Yeah, and you know, we do teach them at their level, on with some things, but we can't do with everything. So how do we help teachers
Yeah.
learn to
Right,
reach all
All of
kids,
that,
right?
yeah.
And so that was our question today. So
okay.
using the PLCs and our time on
Gotcha.
Wednesdays to talk about how do we create different paths for students to learn the standard. So, you know, like what do we want that student to learn? How do we get that student there? So it really, I think it's an ongoing training for all
Yeah. It's
staff
definitely
across the
always.
country.
Right,
Yeah, I would imagine so, that's probably something to always develop. Any other questions? Alright, well, thank you.
I reach out to you to, because, you know, these are all.
There is so much
Hyperlinks in
information,
there, and
yeah.
I'm like trying to click and run.
Oh, on my
So-
manual? Sure,
Yeah.
yeah,
Love it.
I'd love to take you through
I'll reach out to
it.
you and there's a couple of things I wanted to ask, but then I'll
Yeah.
kind of ask you separately because it's just like, oh, another one, okay.
Yeah, no,
So I just wanted to,
There's, yeah, well done, there's so much information there, but I
Thank you.
and it takes a while for me to absorb this.
Yeah, it was, my staff was like, I don't think it's gonna get done. I'm like, it'll get done. We have it here, we just have to, and they work so hard to help me, Heidi and
Yeah,
Laura.
that's great.
We got a lot of good feedback, so.
Was that, this 504 procedural handbook, that's the one you created?
Yep, I created that one, yep. There's the gender support stuff that's in there that was created last year. All of our homeless procedures were tweaked
Oh.
and our forms were updated.
So I'll go through them.
So we went through every procedure and
Wow.
had some tweaks.
I'll reach out.
Very good.
My
Yeah, I'm happy to go over it with you.
Yeah, great.
Alright.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
No,
Okay.
do you guys mind if I scoot? and
Nope, not at
go
all.
on my
Thank
list?
you.
Yeah, I don't mind at all.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Wish you guys the best.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Moving on to district assessment schedule.
Yeah, so, I just wanted to bring this, I don't think we brought this last year,
Okay.
and we always post an assessment schedule
Thank you.
on, the website and communicate with parents ahead of time to go to assessments. But since we did make some tweaks this year, I just wanted you to know a couple of things that,
Really small.
changed.
I-
It is
I
very
increased
small
it.
print
That's
on
really
that, you can,
small. I increased it on the screen.
let's see, I can also go to maybe to the district website, maybe it won't let me, but anyway. It is there under the curriculum learning and analytics site. Elementary, so I just wanna go over a few highlights, just for your information, and I think we talked at elementary, particularly 4K, K1, and 2, that we were tweaking some things to get more in line with phonemic awareness and making sure we were measuring all those things that we needed to. We also, where we could, tried to really refine what data we were collecting when. So for example, we have all of our returning students who took a running record, so where we listen to them read aloud and mark the errors and ask comprehension questions. We did that last spring, so we did not repeat that in the fall for any of our new students. We are starting instruction where they left off in the fall. So only new students will do that right away, and then we'll measure returning students later on in the fall to see where they progressed. So just some of those tweaks, like that, it's time saving for the student,
Sure.
time saving for the teacher. But then there are other places where we decided we needed more information, and one of the pieces at elementary that is a shift for grades 3 through 5, we are going to have them take the MAP test 3 times this year. So we had tested them the last few years just once in the winter, and I had a team come together last spring, last winter, last spring, both at K through, or 4K through 2 and 3 through 5 around assessment, what was working, particularly around literacy, and we dove into each one of our assessments. And one of the pieces that came out was that MAP winter to winter was not serving us as well as it could because we just didn't have enough feedback.
Okay.
So the suggestion was made that we go ahead and have the students do it 3 times. Now, one of the pieces that we also learned through that process was that we need to give our students slightly different instructions as they're taking the MAP test. So the MAP test is designed for you to get about half the questions right. It's
Okay.
computer adaptive. You know,
Sure.
if you get it right,
It moves you up.
it moves you
Yeah.
up. If you get it wrong,
Mhm.
moves you down.
And this
So-
one was, I'm sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
but this was like 20 or 30-minute test, right?
Yeah,
This was
it's can be up to 45 minutes
okay,
as you get harder and harder questions.
sure,
But the thing about it is that students need to know that unlike the forward exam where it's
Mhm.
untimed and they can take as long as they need to, I mean, they
Mhm.
still can hear. But if they don't know the answer, it's okay. Because they're about half of the time, they're not gonna know the answer. So they can read it, make their best guess, move on, and they'll get a question that's closer to their level.
Right.
But sometimes students have a tendency to sit there and they're trying to figure it out and they're trying to teach themselves as they go. And that's not a good use of their time, nor does it give us an accurate level. So as I explained that to some of our teachers and the assessment team, they were like, oh, because one of the kind of the cons for doing the MAP test 3 times is it can be time consuming if the student takes a long period of time to finish. So if we get them in the sweet spot,
Mhm.
it
That's what I was gonna say.
should,
It
you
sounds
know,
like that.
take 45 minutes, maybe an hour for some of our kids who are slower test takers.
yeah.
Mhm.
But it should not be this kids needing 2
So
hours
out
for
of
3 days,
curiosity,
you know.
so why did you go from 1 to 3 and not 1 to 2, like beginning of year, end of year? What was the
So
thought
there was
process?
conversation about that, but we couldn't decide which fall, winter, or spring, which were the right 2.
Okay,
And so they decided to go ahead and do all 3.
and you can always change it.
So we absolutely,
Yeah.
and this
Yeah.
this is a living
Get
document
what you need
that
from that then.
right, and
Okay.
this will be a good opportunity for us to look at that early literacy law that will be coming up for kindergarten through 3rd grade
Mhm.
will require an assessment next year 3 times a year. So this
Okay.
is a little practice on
It's in line with that.
So MAP would suffice, or
Math
we
will
don't know yet?
not, the
Oh.
state is gonna pick what assessment we're
Oh,
gonna do and
gotcha.
everybody
They're
across
still
the
working
state
on
will
that,
do the
yeah.
same thing. So I won't know for a while what that's gonna be and we'll have plenty of time to talk about the literacy law coming
Yeah,
up.
exactly.
Everybody was so excited about
Yeah.
that. But no, I've had one meeting on the literacy law last week and then I have another one this week and then I think I'll have some information to come forward and
And you
share
might
just
not know
with
this
you.
silly question, but will MAP still be used for other things?
I think that
Okay.
we need to decide that.
Oh,
I think so.
Might get modified somehow.
Yeah, I think for next year.
Yeah.
But then
Depending on what that other assessment
Assessment,
shows
it-
you, is it
it could be
showing what you
something,
want, or do you feel like you need more?
correct, or it
Mhm.
could be something that new assessment could be something that we could adapt across multiple grade levels and,
Mhm.
you know, could be adopted. I just don't know what it's going to be. There was a desire, as I talked with different teams last year, to look at MAP. Is it still the best assessment out there? And so I think that's a conversation I would want a team to really come together and do a deep dive into the assessment options that are out there, talk about what our goals really are with assessment and dig in. Given our work around ELA and social studies this year, because we do have those ESSER funds, I'm not sure that, and knowing the new literacy law and the assessment, I'm not sure that that's gonna be on the front burner this year.
Sure.
So, but
You don't have all the time in the world?
unfortunately.
Mhm. Very good.
So, yeah, so I think those other things are priorities right now. But, so I wanted you to know about that change. Later on in the year, you can see where we get into the state testing. Not every student takes every one of these assessments, so, because it is a long list.
I know, I was like, oh wow,
But there are
compared to
certain
the other
things, you know,
grades.
there's something called the Access, which our English language learners take.
Right,
There is something in there called NAEP, which is the National Assessment of Educational Progress. We did that, just put that on there just as an FYI. Every year, the Federal Department of Education and the State of Wisconsin Department of Education select students and schools to host a NAEP test. The NAEP test you may have heard different times in the news, that the nation's report card
yeah.
and
Mhm.
how students are doing in reading and math across the country.
Right.
That's the assessment that they
Mm.
get that data from.
Okay.
We don't get any of the results, we just get the opportunity to have some of our students test.
Hmm.
So, and that's kind of randomly selected opportunity.
Interesting. Okay.
We didn't have anybody last year,
So-
but
Yeah, sometimes there's a confusion between the NAEP and then what we take in the state.
right.
Yeah,
And they're-
exactly.
So
they're
that's a
separate.
common, actually
Yeah.
misunderstanding when it's generally reported in the news
Right.
about, oh, the report card, just
Yeah,
like
the nation's
was
report card, yeah.
mentioned here, that's completely a separate thing than the report cards and the information that's created and the assessment schedules in the state of Wisconsin.
So at elementary, we have some fourth graders at Valley View who will be taking that. It's usually about 40 students that they want to see for that, and somebody comes in and we help them get that done. So, I think those are the big changes for elementary, and then I posted to middle school and high school. Without the, the fundamental reading pieces on there, at middle school and high school, the list is a lot shorter.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Obviously,
true.
they have more unit
true.
assessments and things like that within their courses that we don't put on this schedule. But they also have the math assessment, and at middle school, we did take that 3 times last year, and we'll do that again this year. They found it to be very beneficial. So we're gonna continue with that.
8 students here for the NAEP.
8th grade, so.
Yeah, 4th, 8th.
Yeah, so 4th, 8th, those are typical grades.
Do they do it in high school too?
Sometimes they do. In fact,
Okay.
I gotta
Oh,
look.
here.
I think it's
Yeah,
on
they
there
do.
too.
12, oh, 12th grade, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But usually they,
Yeah.
I think like the ACTs and all that,
Yeah,
a better indicator.
right, yes, but they like that. The NAEP they've been doing for years and years and years. I used to know how many it was. It's like 30 or something. I mean,
Oh,
it's
really?
like
Yeah.
law. I should look that up. I don't remember what that is anymore, but it's a long-standing test that they've used. At high school, we did add one thing as well. High school does not take math. But they are adding, last year, you may remember or may not, because we haven't been able to share the results publicly yet, we had our 9th and 10th graders take the pre-ACT.
Yeah.
Which was a new assessment for them, and that
Right.
was a state-required assessment, replaced the ACT Aspire test from previous years. There is the opportunity to have students take the pre-ACT in the fall as well, and that is something that is locally decided on and financed. So that was something that Mr. Bauer was interested in doing, to have some pre and post data for those 9th and 10th graders and see if the work that they do in between time
Sure.
makes a difference. So we were able to fund that. I think at one time we were using building funds, we might be using some ESSER funds now.
We shift to ESSER.
Yeah.
So Mr. Bauer and I had a meeting a few weeks ago and we shifted $10,000 of ESSER money to help support exactly that.
Yeah, which I think is great. The thing I like about this fall pre-ACT is it is on paper, but the students get to keep the test book. So they have their answers and their test book. And so they can use that to see what it is they did wrong and read the
Kind of a
problems.
study guide. So,
Yeah, so I think that's a good opportunity for students, so that'll be new for us. So.
And then remind me, what is STAR?
STAR is a reading assessment that they use specifically at the high school in their ELA classes as well as the strategic reading class. So,
Yeah, it sounded familiar. I
Yeah.
just could
Yeah.
not.
and it's a fairly short reading assessment compared to math or some of the other things that we do, but it gives them a quick reading level. And all students in grades 9 through 11 take it during certain times of the year, and then students who are in that strategic reading class take it more often to measure their progress.
It's generally what's known in the business as a universal screener.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
yeah, so it's a quick tool to kind of get a gauge.
Do they read like a paragraph or something, or?
I haven't seen the test in a little bit,
Yeah.
but it is a series of, I think, like passages.
Comprehension.
It's mostly comprehension.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
there's some vocabulary in there as well, if I
Gotcha.
recall correctly.
Yeah.
So I haven't actually gotten to see someone take a STAR test in a while, so. But yeah, it measures multiple aspects of reading.
Cool.
So,
Any other questions or comments? Okay, good. Then we're gonna move on to the next discussion item, the recurring,
yes, the calendar.
the committee calendar.
So yes, so originally we didn't have anything on the calendar for September, and then of course we were able to find a few things.
Yeah.
Actually had a couple changes to the few
Oh, really?
things, but
Yeah.
but here we are. And then in October, we would look at a title report and any new course requests for next year, although I don't have any at the present time. And then we had initially planned, and I think we may be ready to bring you an initial update around K through 12 social studies curriculum.
Oh, okay.
So, and that's pending a few meetings between now and then.
Yeah.
That'll get us started, and there may be something in the world language area, but I'm still working on determining the need there, so.
Just to remind the board members here that the K-12 curriculum, we've already kind of slotted ESSER funds to support the social studies curriculum purchase this year and ELA, English language curriculum resources this year. So we're, there are some additional funds that are unspent, but that is funded at this point pending the completion of this process.
Yeah, so we'll, obviously gonna depend on what we identify the needs are and then
Exactly.
the materials that will match the needs and how much they cost and all that good fun stuff. But we're just at the beginning process for that. And they're always more expensive than I think for
Absolutely.
Sure.
Grocery
bill. Make your big
I know.
old wish list and then trim it back.
Exactly, and then we'll see what we can actually fund, so.
Yeah, like what's realistic.
Yes, I have big dreams.
Everything's gonna be electronic, it's gonna be amazing, so much more affordable, remember that?
Yeah, right.
That's
Now they
true.
have the laptop and all their books and
The books
the
are
costs.
I remember the DPI saying once when I was a building principal, they had this approach using binders, digital binders.
Oh, yeah, they still have some of those out there. If you're looking for a
Get
certain,
outta
if
here.
you're
They
looking
still
for a certain
exist?
resource,
So
you can see a digital binder.
A
but-
digital trapper keeper.
so there was this push that we were
Love trapper
Missing the
keepers.
Velcro
Okay,
sound.
whoever used their trapper keeper?
I
I'm
totally
sorry.
did. I had
Did you? I
Yes,
never
I
did. I
had
just
one.
loved
my
it.
planner.
I never did. I had no patience for it. Never.
You're the paper person.
I know, but it never held enough stuff. You know,
You want a
like,
bigger one.
well, yeah, like it
Double
needed to be more
trapper.
reasonable. Like it needed. You probably had to pay more for the insert. Sorry, but yeah, minus the Velcro.
Oh, yeah, that's just missing the, digital binders, but.
Well, there was this push by the DPI, it had to be more than a decade ago. Oh, it's the new era, everything's digital, and we had
Oh, yeah.
these digital binders, so we were all PD'd up and
PD'd
and I went to my staff at the time, it was a high school staff size of Menominee Falls, but in Menominee, I was like, okay, you guys are gonna need to do this is the,
Great.
cause that's what I was told to do.
Newer's always better.
And then a year ago, and then a year later, it was like nothing, and it didn't go anywhere, and I was like, I'm not doing that again.
Can I ask you about the calendar real quick?
Yes.
Not to throw this out here.
Yeah, no, that's why we're
Are we
looking at it.
starting with all the curriculum policies? Are we starting in here working?
We will
And-
start
And I'm not
here,
saying we
yes.
have to like
Yes.
tackle it, but maybe we
No.
start chipping away a little bit?
Yes, so I would like to bring you a
Okay.
first
Okay.
draft, if that's
Oh,
okay,
okay, sure.
or at least some
Yeah.
starting points, and we
Alright.
can certainly
Okay.
talk about that, it's on my to-do
Okay,
list.
great.
And I think because, one of the things that I want to do is have, our learning improvement specialists who did such a nice job running our science,
Yeah.
or I shouldn't say running, leading our
Okay.
science, pilot review process last
Right,
spring come
right.
together. And so in having in mind our social studies in ELA and kind of
Oh.
refine that process and
Yeah.
then kind of make sure our policy and our best practices
Okay.
matched.
Okay.
I mean, I think they do, but
Yeah,
just that
yeah.
language.
Okay.
But if there's anything in particular, maybe if I put something together and then you
Yeah,
and
I
I
mean,
wanna
we can start giving thoughts
and
and
then
stuff in
bring
emails
something.
maybe or whatever. I feel weird about adding to a Google Doc. I'm sorry. I
Yeah,
just feel
no.
like I will
Yeah.
mess with something and you can never find it.
It's
But I
a-
mean, I'm happy to put
yeah.
bullet point notes
So-
and give it to you.
Okay,
Added
yeah,
history,
if there's anything.
I guess, is there? I
there
don't know.
is, yeah.
I mean, I could put it on the
Or you
bottom and
hash
not,
it
I don't
out.
wanna
I was gonna,
interfere.
we can.
I would
Yeah.
probably say you two hash it out.
Yeah, that's true.
Does that work?
Yeah,
We can,
right.
and then bring it here.
Like in
for this
general.
draft.
I
Yeah,
mean-
I think the
I know.
challenge is it's like 4 separate documents right now, so trying to make sure the key pieces
Exactly.
get in there
I know.
is gonna take a little
I mean,
bit,
they're good
so
policies, but
just-
we need to like, yeah.
so,
But it's still,
Check in on it.
yeah, for sure.
And then we'll just,
we'll say here
Back
it is
up.
and you'll go,
Yeah,
great.
exactly.
That looks
Yeah,
great.
great. It's just when all done. Uh-huh.
but it's just
And then Joel
It
could
is-
come,
yeah,
and then
I think
actually
just
we
because
can policy, we
it's
could have
so-
Lena come to our meeting,
yeah.
right?
And I think I probably, I gotta get my head around it first.
No,
but
I
we
know,
can
you gotta be in a
totally-
rep.
Yeah, so we'll.
But I was thinking, cause I was
almost
looking
there.
ahead, I'm like,
Yes.
oh, as it gets heavy in January and
Yes,
you know,
100%,
usually
yeah.
January
No.
and February get kinda heavy. I think.
Ideally, it would be done before winter break,
Yeah.
that's
I think that's a good goal.
for me,
Yeah, I
and
think
that's
that's a
good
good
for
goal.
everybody
And
else.
I don't wanna do
Okay.
a whole lot of work when it comes to policy.
I think
When it
you,
goes to policy.
Right, no, we wanna,
to
we
like
wanna
just
have it,
polish it and then
Okay.
we wanna have it all.
Well,
wanna
that's what I'm
tear it to
saying, like,
shreds.
well then,
Yeah.
yeah, like.
I agree with
But
that
Joel,
approach.
like, just,
I
but
think-
Joel might even be here, we might even be able to hash it out sooner than later.
Yeah.
So, but I
So
think
easier,
that
so those
matching,
policies.
like what best practice, you
Yeah,
know,
take
what
it a
we're
little
saying
bit.
works,
Yeah.
like I want it
Exactly,
reflected
I
there,
think
so.
it'll go, I think it, once we get rolling, it'll start flowing, so, yeah. That sounds good.
I'm really worried, okay.
Anything else to add to the calendar, any thoughts or things down the road, future, that you need information on, or discussions, or?
I mean,
The other thing
we're
was,
not bored, so.
the other thing was, and I don't know if it's a in here item, is the communication of curriculum, like, well, I guess that's kind of
Yes.
policy.
So it
That's
would
a
kind of be
communication,
policy, I think,
Well,
here's where I think
Yeah.
we're at with, just in terms of calendar without
I mean, like
discussing a new item,
posting,
but posting things.
Yeah.
So
like on
what
the
I am learning is that we've got pieces
Okay,
all over the place.
Okay.
So I've started working with the curriculum chairs. Yes, you have
Okay.
things, but Laura and I can't see them.
gotcha,
How do we bring
Okay.
all of these things together
So you
and
work
have it in one
yeah.
place? And then one of Laura's projects, she doesn't know it yet, but now that we have an administrative assistant.
now that we bring it up.
Yeah, is
Oh, yeah.
so I need to
You
tell
can
you,
delegate.
this isn't a surprise.
Laura, and then you tell her what.
Yeah, no, but this isn't a surprise, but thinking about how we do that, like,
Yeah.
because not every department who's written curriculum over the years has done it in the same format.
Okay,
And so how do we standardize that a little bit so
Okay.
that it's easy for parents to read when they go from science curriculum to social studies curriculum, that they're looking for the same thing.
Yes.
So it's a larger
Yeah.
project
So
than it
here's my thought.
seems.
maybe once we get that buttoned up and wrapped up, maybe just a quick discussion on it,
Okay.
like just to express like what was done and then like show us. Like, would that be good, do you think? Okay,
As far as just the curriculum
Like-
itself or what we're
or maybe
communicating
that
to
could be done
parents?
behind the scenes actually.
Yeah,
You know,
I
like this is
think,
what we worked on and then go see our website, this is
Yeah,
what we
this is what,
updated.
this is what we
Yeah.
provided,
Maybe
so
so
that
I-
this is what
yeah.
parents are gonna
Yeah.
see and.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah, like, cause you
I-
wanna highlight it, we're gonna show it off.
For sure, for sure, I
Put it
think
in
it's
newsletters and,
gonna be a larger
Share it on
project,
Facebook.
because I think we're gonna have to look at each curriculum
Right.
itself first. We're not just gonna be able to
Oh.
pull from what they have and stick it right on the
oh,
website.
interesting,
It's gonna need some tweaking to make
Okay.
sure that we've got the same components available for each.
wow,
So-
interesting.
It's some curriculum work.
Way more
worked up.
complex than I thought, but okay.
Once it's done, that outline is
Then-
gonna be
Yeah,
really nice to have.
Right. Yes, so,
alright, so then
Yes.
next meeting, I have no clue.
yes, so next
Just kidding,
meeting
I know
is
we
the
do.
18th of
Okay, thank
October. I looked before
Oh, good,
before
PM.
meeting, that's
At
a
6
Wednesday
PM, okay.
at 6 p.m.
Yeah, Wednesday.
It's October 18th, so exactly 1 month from today.
I will call if I'm running late, depending on traffic.
Yeah.
It's getting a little bit better with the road construction on the expressway. Okay, and then anything else before I adjourn? So I need a motion to adjourn.
All motion?
One second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, sounds good.
Alright,
Motion, our meeting adjourned.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wow, we did it like to the minute.
Yes,
We started.
I feel like that was really good.
Mhm.